everyone. Since it is June, I thought I would share my list of recommended LGBT themed movies. I am I would say a connoisseur of the genre. I've seen or heard of most films that feature LGBT content, so I have quite a list, and this isn't even all of it, so might do a part two, don't know. I'm gonna bucket this by like different types of categories. So the first category is ones that everyone knows. And these are films like Moonlight, Love, Simon, Call Me By Your Name, Carol, and Brokeback Mountain. I'm sure you've heard of these. They're good films. I would recommend checking them out if you haven't seen any. It's a good starting point. And the next category, I would say, is true stories / historical. And these are ones that are inspired by a true story or reflect a time that is in the past. The first movie I would suggest is Pride. It is the story of how LGBT activists supported the miners' strike, and a good reminder that a lot of movements are tied together and like strongest when united. So yeah. There was also the iconic quote in the movie called "Every woman is a lesbian at heart," including Reggie's mom, but yeah. Iconic quote. Go watch the movie to understand what context that's from. Yeah. I don't know, it's also a good reminder that like political movements are never completely united, but it's always the actions of a few like bold and courageous people that gets things started. So never feel like you don't matter. Yeah, makes me tear up because I'm sappy.
Communities are being bullied just like we are. What they need is cash.
Yeah, because the miners have always come to our aid, haven't they?
It doesn't matter, it's the right thing to do.
The next one is called Beats Per Minute. It is about ACT UP in Paris in the 1990s. The director and screenwriters drew their own experiences from ACT UP in France in the 1990s. So it's definitely very true to the source material and very true to the emotions of the time. A good portrait of the tireless and chaotic and creative energy around activism during ACT UP and the fight for AIDS treatment. GBH, like this film is one of the few films on the topic, or this film is one of the ways that I learned about the AIDS crisis, because God knows I didn't learn about it in school. I think they do a really good job of taking a somewhat fictionalized but personal approach to the era and bringing the audience closer into the lives and the problems and the like what's at stake without seeming like, oh, this is completely fictional. It still feels very historical and accurate even though it's a fictional story. Yeah, I would recommend it if you are interested in learning more about the AIDS crisis and specifically, I guess, seeing a film in French. Yeah.
C'est que l'État sache qu'on le fera chier tant qu'il n'y aura pas une vraie politique de prévention. Rien sur les PD, rien sur les toxicos, rien sur les personnes les plus touchées par cette épidémie.
The next one I would recommend is a film called Milk, and not the drinkable milk, but the historical figure Harvey Milk, who I didn't really know much about until pretty recently. He was a politician that ran for a position in the city government, the city council of San Francisco, a number of times, but ended up winning like in his third time? Anyway, Milk is a biopic about Harvey Milk, and he did a lot of great stuff around activism, and it takes a lot of BS in the process of trying to become a politician and represent like his community. Yeah, it's a very hopeful and tragic and frustrating and then hopeful again film. If you don't know, Harvey Milk was assassinated, and part of the reason was because he had a lot of enemies, because he was a huge champion for gay rights. the film also shows like kind of what gay culture was like in San Francisco right before the AIDS pandemic hit. So, or the AIDS epidemic hit. So it's a really good portrait of that time and a really great way to learn more about Harvey Milk. Yeah.
I'm not going to be forced out of San Francisco by social deviants and incorrigibles.
We need one of our own in office.
We could have a revolution here.
I don't do losing.
Next one is Battle of the Sexes. It's based on the true story of the 1973 tennis match between Billie Jean King and Bobby Riggs, and it helped, like, I think it's one of the contributing factors to changing the perspective on women's sports and public opinion and or public opinion on Title IX and like fair treatment of women in sports. I won't go into the whole history of why the Battle of Sexes happened and like what it was for, but it was like a media event designed to like garner up support for women's tennis, because at that time like women were not being paid at all fairly for like their championship money, and a lot of people were like, you know, women's tennis is just not exciting, like the players aren't that good, and Bobby Riggs was like, I bet me as a retired world champion can take on any female, and so he challenged Billie Jean King, who was the world champion at that time, or national champion. She was a champion at that time, and the Battle of Sexes was a televised event between those two. Yeah, it is a high budget movie with high profile actors, which you don't really often see around LGBT films. Yeah, most of the movie is centered around Billie Jean King and her playing tennis, but it does feature like an affair that she had with another woman, with her hairdresser. Yeah, and it includes some really good scenes about like finally letting go of like, or it includes a really good scene of her finally letting herself be loved and being loved by someone who is the same gender as herself. So it's a really good film. Definitely has its problems and historical inaccuracies, but I think it is a good reflection. Yeah, and I thought it was very true to the experience of realizing something about yourself and really daring to lean into something that scares you, but you know is right.
Hello?
Eureka, Billie Jean!
It's Bobby Riggs. Listen, I had a great idea.
Male chauvinist pig versus hairy-legged feminist. No offense.
You're still a feminist, right?
I'm a tennis player who happens to be a woman.
Don't hang up.
By the way, I shaved my legs.
Okay, the next category I would call Coming of Age. This is my favorite category. I don't know, there's something about coming of age films in general that I really enjoy, but especially when it intersects with queer identity, yes, good content. So the first one I'd recommend is The Way He Looks. It is like, I think it honestly is like my favorite movie ever. Yeah, highly recommend. It is just so tender and pure. It is about this blind high schooler who is just trying to like get freedom in his life. He's tired of his parents always like protecting him and shielding him, and he just kind of wants to have some amount of freedom in his life, and he falls in love with this new kid in his class, and I don't know, it's just so tender, so pure. Also, their Brazilian Portuguese accents, good stuff. Makes me want to speak Portuguese or understand what they're saying in the original language. Yeah. Also, the actors in the film, very attractive. And the soundtrack is good. Yeah. It's like one of the best coming-of-age films that I've seen, and it really tackles disability, sexuality, growing up, and falling in love, and all these other things without seeming like cliched or gimmicky. So, highly recommend.
Quem é que vai querer me beijar?
Aqui é o 211?
É aqui sim. Como é que se chama?
Gabriel.
The next one I would recommend is Pariah. It is about Alike, who is a 17-year-old black girl who is slowly coming to terms with her identity as a butch lesbian. It deals with themes of culture clashing with identity, and there are bad things that happen, but I think ultimately it is hopeful and not tragic. Even though bad things do happen to Alike, it's just, I think the tone of the film at the end is hopeful, which, you know, is something always good in this genre where you don't tend to have happy endings. Yeah, I think it's a really good portrait of growing up and fully becoming yourself and embracing the consequences, but also being excited for the future. And I think that's ultimately what any coming-of-age film should do. So, highly, highly recommend this movie.
I know for homecoming that I want to go with Craig.
And who are you going to go with, Lee?
I'm not going.
What do you mean you're not going?
If she doesn't want to go, she doesn't have to go.
Okay, the next one I would call romantic comedy / romantic drama, because some of these are rom-coms and some of these are more dramas. First one I would recommend is Saving Face. It is one of my favorite movies again. If you don't know Saving Face, it is Alice Wu's first feature film. She also directed the half of it, which came out on Netflix a few months ago. It's kind of been floating around as a good movie to watch. So if you've seen the half of it and liked it, I think I would definitely recommend Saving Face, because I think in my opinion I like Saving Face a little bit more, and it's like her first film. It was like one of the first films that I saw myself reflected in, really, like I saw myself so deeply reflected in it, and it was it came at the right time in my life too. I was like growing up Chinese American and like coming to terms with my own sexuality. It was just really, really nice to see that kind of representation in a film that came out in 2004. So just really bonkers. Yeah, the fact that there was like Chinese language spoken in the film, it really highlighted that, like, the Chinese American identity. The fact that she like comes out to her mom in the film, and there's like themes of community and family and identity, and it's just a cute like romantic comedy film too. The title is called Saving Face because in Asian culture there's this concept of saving face, where you like do things to like bring honor to your family, and you shouldn't lose face. You shouldn't like do something that would like embarrass your family or your parents, and that's seen as something like a really big no-no. Yeah, I really like it because it's a universal story of love and trying to balance out your career and your family and your goals and everything swirling around you, but it's told from a very highly specific lens. And I think the best stories are themes that are universal but highly specific. So highly recommend Saving Face. Important film that really matters a lot to me.
Seriously, well, why don't you just tell her?
She knows.
And she kept setting you up with guys.
Oh, I'm sorry.
The next one I would recommend is Shelter. This is a recent film that I watched, but I think it's from like 2007 or 2008, so it's not a recent film that came out. I just watched it recently. Yeah, it's really cute. It deals with someone who he's kind of in this like very small town California, and he was gonna go to college, but like he didn't end up going because he like felt responsible to take care of his sister's son, so his nephew, and his like disabled father, so he ended up giving up on college, and he's just kind of like bumming around working for minimum wage in his hometown and feeling a little bit stuck. And he meets one of his friend's brothers, and they fall in love, and it's like set in this like really nice like small California town where there's like surfing, and it's just really cute. And I don't know, it's a good film about like accepting yourself, and the fact that like a little bit of help from others, a little bit of belief from others can really go a long way. The person that he falls in love with ends up like really encouraging him to reapply for art school, and he's pretty hesitant about it, but yeah. I think it deals with themes of like sometimes making the selfish decision, because at the end of the day you are the most important person in your life, and sometimes you do need to make the selfish decision. You don't always need to give so much of yourself that you're making yourself miserable, because at the end of the day you're the one living your life. It's so tender and heartfelt, and there's this really cute scene where the guy and the boyfriend are taking care of his nephew, and it's just so cute. So recommend highly.
How you doing, man? I haven't seen you since like your graduation. You want to go surfing?
Then there's this film called Imagine Me and You. If you've ever wanted a British rom-com that is totally not realistic but still cute, and features all the classic like British rom-com tropes, but it's gay, then have you heard of Imagine Me and You? Because this is that film. So the bride of a wedding falls in love with the florist from a wedding, and then the film revolves around their budding relationship as she is married to this man. It's cute, and it has the iconic line, "You are a wanker, number 9." Watch the film to see what context that's in. Yes, highly recommend Imagine Me and You. Very cute. Also includes a classic airport chase scene, which is a staple of rom-coms.
So, how about you? Married? Have we been married? Are we gonna be married?
I'm gay.
Okay, the next category is called set in history. So these are not historical films, but they are set in a very specific time in history. So the first one I recommend is called Maurice. Young Hugh Grant is in this movie. He's very attractive. There's a scene where, honestly, it's like a very intimate scene. Like, their clothes are on, they're not even looking at each other, they're just kind of like sitting next to each other, but there's like so much like sexual and romantic tension. Like, they really nailed like that like repressed, like posh like British aristocratic culture mixed with like longing glances. And it's about Maurice, who is not from an aristocratic class, but attends Cambridge and meets Clive, who is rich and handsome. They like start having some strong romantic tension, but Clive doesn't want to lose his like social status and position, so the tension continues. It's not a tragic film though, so A+. Would recommend Maurice.
By continuing like this, you and I are risking everything we have. Our families, our names. I don't give a damn about me.
The next movie I'd recommend is called The Handmaiden. It is truly a wild journey from start to beginning. I just want to prepare you for that. I don't want to spoil anything, but just know that if you watch this movie, you are in for a wild journey. Nothing will prepare you for it, so I'm just going to warn you about it right now. So it is set in Korea under Japanese colonial rule, and this time period is a very repressive time. Like, if you don't know anything about like Japan's occupation of Korea during this time, like Japanese forced Koreans to only speak Japanese and take on a different surname. So basically Japan was just like, Korea, it's a very repressive time. And so the plot of the premise of this movie is that there's a con man who wants to seduce a Japanese heiress for her money, and to do that, the con man enlists a pickpocket named Suki to be her handmaiden and to get close to her. So Suki gets employed as her handmaiden, and chaos ensues in this scheme to get this Japanese heiress's money. the next one I would recommend is called Desert Hearts. This film came out in the 80s, so it's an old film, but it's so good still. I think it was like, I looked at the Wikipedia entry for this. I think it said it was like one of the first films to like positively portray a queer relationship and for the movie not to end terribly, like not to end badly. So yeah, definitely a landmark film in that sense. So the premise of it is that there's a Columbia professor who is trying to divorce her husband, but during this era, like to qualify for a divorce, you have to live away from your husband for, I think, like a month and a half. So she goes to Reno, Nevada to just stay there, out of state, for a few weeks, so her divorce can go through. And while she's there, she meets Kay Rivers, who is the daughter of the person who owns the ranch house that she's staying at. And she's like, Kay Rivers is like very free-spirited and very confident in her sexuality. And the movie is really sweet, and yeah, it's a good film. If you've ever wanted something that's like set in the American West and has that energy of like, I do what I want and like anything can happen, this is that film. Kind of speaks to how the American West is sometimes seen as like a place slightly outside the law, and kind of allows for freedom and self-discovery.
Call me Vivian. Welcome to Reno. I've always lived in the city. I don't know what to do with all this space. Lots of iced tea and no deep thinking. Oh, brother. How do you do?
So, speaking of the American West and a place that allows for freedom and self-discovery, this leads me to my next category, which is more of an honorable mention, but my next category is repressed cowboys. And honestly, this is like a whole genre. Like, I'm only listing a few because I want to recommend movies that I've seen, but there are lots of repressed cowboy films that I haven't seen. It's just like a whole genre. I don't know why. So the most famous one, of course, is Brokeback Mountain, but there's also God's Own Country, which is also really cute, and I would recommend. Yeah. Someone explained to me why repressed cowboys is a genre, but it is. And then lastly, I have some honorable mentions. These are films that I liked and enjoyed, but I just don't really have time to kind of go through everything in this film and like break it down and like give a full recommendation. But I would definitely recommend checking these movies out if you haven't heard of it. If you're like me and has exhausted like almost every film or has heard or seen of most of them already, like maybe you haven't seen some of these in these honorable mentions. So I'm just gonna list them. So Tangerine, shot entirely on an iPhone, crazy. Miseducation of Cameron Post, fun story. I saw this in New York theaters when it was coming out last summer, so that was a crazy experience. Princess Sid, Rafiki, which is made by this Nigerian filmmaker. So yeah, recommend seeing movies that are not just produced in Hollywood. The Watermelon Woman, D.e.b.s, good stuff. And Cloudburst, which features an older lesbian couple that's lived together for many years, and they suddenly, because one of them is like dying, they want to travel across the border to Canada to get legally married. Yeah, this was back in the day where marriage was not legal, so in the recent past. Yeah, it's very cute. And one of the very few films that I've seen featuring older queer people. And then the last one is Professor Marston and the Wonder Woman. And features the very interesting story behind the person who wrote Wonder Woman. So these are my movie recs for this month of June. But honestly, Pride is year-round, so you can watch this anytime. I think these movies matter a lot to me because they let me feel represented and kind of gives me a sense of what it means to be queer in this world. Yeah, highly recommend checking these movies. If you have any that you recommend, please let me know. And if you've seen any of these and also agree with my opinion or disagree, let me know. I'm curious to see like what other films people enjoy and recommend. Because yeah, there needs to be more queer content out there. Yeah, thanks for watching. Hope you found this helpful or useful at all.